Some of you may have heard, who's heard of Dr. William Lane Craig? Oh, a lot of you. Okay. So Dr. William Lane Craig actually has his own organization called Reasonable Faith. He's said to be a great apologist of our age. In fact, he's looked up to by many seminaries and Bible colleges. He is visiting professor at Talbot School of Theology associated with Biola, because there's a lot of professors there who would not agree with our position on Genesis because they believe in millions of years and so on. And he's professor of philosophy at Houston Baptist University. So in 2009, let me show you what he's saying.
How old is the world?
So best estimates today are around 13.7 billion years or so.
No, this is good. You see, this is a position I can embrace because there are people who will sit here and say, no, it's 6,500 years old. That is not a terrible position.
I don't think it's plausible. The arguments that I give are right in line with mainstream science. I'm not bucking up against mainstream science in presenting these arguments, rather I'm going with the flow of what contemporary cosmology.
You notice what he's saying? See how he used the word science? You need to understand what the word science means. And the word science means knowledge. And I said, here's the point. You can have knowledge you gain by your five senses that builds technology, and we can all agree on that science. We call it observational science, or operational science. Or you can have knowledge about the past when you weren't there. That's historical science. That's the origins issue. The problem we have today is that you'll find the secularists use the one word science for origins and science for your technology or experiments in the lab or whatever. And people are indoctrinated to believe, well, wait a minute, if scientists who invented all this technology are using the word science for millions of years of evolution, I can't give up science. They don't understand that you need to have a real comprehension of what the word means, and there's a difference between beliefs about the past and what you can experiment with your five senses in the present. So I explained that at the Bill Nye debate. One of the problems I've seen is so many of our theologians in many of our seminaries and colleges across this nation, they have capitulated to this, and they'll say, because of what the scientists are saying. Now, William Lane Craig is saying, because of science. I'm not going against what science is saying, but he's talking about scientists talking about the Big Bang, billions of years, which is beliefs about origins. That's not empirical science. And so what he's really saying is, I'm going with the flow of what fallible man says about origins. I'm not going with what God's word says. Therein lies the problem with much of the church. Now, one of the things I've been saying for years is once you open that door and start adding millions of years into the Bible like that, eventually you'll give up biblical authority. Eventually you'll give up the book of Genesis. Let's see where William Lane Craig is today, 12 years later, or a bit over 12 years later, and he just published a book recently, and he was interviewed about this book.
I would be disingenuous, Sean, if I were to say I don't want the young earth creationist interpretation to come out true. To me, that is a nightmare. My greatest fear is that the young earth creationist might be right in his hermeneutical claim that Genesis does teach those things that I described earlier. And I say that would be a nightmare because if that's what the Bible teaches, it puts the Bible into massive, I think, irredeemable conflict with modern science.
If you believe the Bible is written in Genesis, that puts it in conflict with what he calls science, but it's to do with origins. We can't have that, therefore you can't believe the Bible. He should be saying, therefore we can't believe what man is saying. He's saying the opposite. And it's been a problem in the church, and it's a problem that has permeated Christendom.
About the matter of Adam being made from dirt and Eve being formed from one of Adam's ribs, are those elements part of the myth in the mytho-history, or do you think they're historical?
I think that is part of the figurative language of myth. I have long been suspicious of things such as the creation of Eve from a rib out of Adam's side, as though God performed some sort of literal surgery on the man and built a woman out of it, or that God shaped this figurine out of dirt and then breathed into its nose the breath of life and the statue came alive. It seemed to me that this was clearly figurative language.
I shouldn't have to say much about that here, right, at this college?
I think it should prompt us not to be over-literalistic in the way we read these narratives. And once you begin to look at them in terms of mytho-history, it's difficult to look at them in any other way. I mean, when you read a story about two people in an arboretum with these magical trees whose fruit, if you eat it, will grant you immortality or knowledge of good and evil, and then there's this talking snake who comes along and tempts them into sin. And then you have this anthropomorphic God walking in the cool of the garden, calling out audibly to Adam in his hideout. You think, well, of course this is figurative. and metaphorical language. This isn't meant to be read in this sort of literalistic fashion. And so once you begin to see these narratives this way, I think you begin to ask yourself, how could I have read them any other way? It would be like reading Aesop's fables literalistically as really about talk.
So if you believe in literal Genesis, it's like taking Aesop's fables literally. And what does he mean by mytho-history? You know what he means? It's myth. That's what he means. Because that's what it really is saying. People, do you realize he was mocking the account of the creation of Adam and Eve? He was mocking the fall, the way it's given in the Bible. He was mocking that. And then, okay, one last one. I know you're tired of these, but one last one.
Now, assuming then, for the sake of argument, the truth of evolutionary biology concerning human origins, we can imagine sometime prior to 750,000 years ago, a group of hominins, maybe a few thousand, and through a biological and spiritual renovation, perhaps divinely induced, a miracle that caused a genetic regulatory mutation in a pair of these hominins, they were lifted to fully human status.
You know what? I would rather believe God's word that he made them directly from dust and made Eve directly from Adam's side than this nonsense. People, this is a problem. It's permeated the church.